This video is brought to you by Raycon. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of What I Watched This Month Spooktober edition. Because last month was a little different in that I pretty much only watched horror movies, I'm gonna go in a ranked order from worst to best. My goal was 31 movies and I didn't quite get there, but we're doing it anyways. As I mentioned in my found footage video, I'm just not the biggest fan of Paranormal Activity, and it was easily the worst thing I saw this month. I understand it was very big for found footage and it's undeniably pretty spooky sometimes, but it feels like, how could it not be, right? It's kind of hard for you to fail at scaring someone when you throw something wild at the audience after giving them nothing. It just feels like a very lazy concept and execution that doesn't do more than it needs to. I know, already hitting you with a lousy opinion on a classic horror movie. I have tried a lot of different times to get into this movie, and I've never finished it until this last month, and let me just tell you, nothing has really changed. I don't know what's wrong with me, but this is just such an uninteresting movie, and I believe that's because of how uninteresting these main characters are. I could not care less if they're in danger, or if they're safe, or if something funny happens to them. They just feel like pieces of 2x4s. It's just not my thing, I guess, but thankfully, this was not the only Evil Dead movie I watched this month, and yeah, we'll get there. This is only my second Claire Denis film, the other being High Life, and this one was Both this and High Life are insanely sensual and prioritize body language more than they do words. In High Life, that really worked for me, but here I felt pretty disconnected to everything that was happening. It's an interesting concept that I won't spoil for anyone who wants to give it a watch, but it doesn't really feel like it serves any purpose other than, oh, cool. Whereas I felt kind of bad about not loving The Evil Dead, I don't feel that bad about not loving Blair Witch, another horror classic. I also talked about this in my found footage video, so I won't keep you too long, but yeah, it just felt stale and not very scary to me. And I thought it was supposed to be scary. I thought that was the whole point. But I'll say it again, I can appreciate how important this was at the time, so I can't be too hard on it. What is there to say about the blob? No, really, this is a super fun concept where a blob just takes over the town, but there's barely any blob. Like, there's 5% blob at most, which, like, I get it. It's probably the most they could do with a blob in the 50s, but come on, at least fill the other space with some interesting stuff that isn't like a shitty teen romance. That's really all I have to say about this. It needed more blob, and it had a good theme song. Heyo, Hubie Halloween is fun, alright? Can we all just get over ourselves for one goddamn minute and admit that it's a fun time? You can argue it isn't fun-y, but it's fun. Let me just say that the editing in this thing is so snappy and quick, it really moves things along. Adam Sandler's performance doesn't get stale when it really should. I think that there are way too many plots going on, a lot of which feel kind of pointless by the end of the movie, and because of that it feels unnecessarily clunky in a lot of parts, but I forgive it. A good movie? Not by any means, but Steve Buscemi clearly tried too hard for me to say anything mean about this. The interesting thing about Hellraiser is that I wasn't feeling it too hard during my watch, but a few days later it hit me that this isn't like any horror movie out there. It truly feels like it doesn't fit in any particular genre. I also appreciate how, for as predictable as it feels in the middle, you really don't expect this to unfold the way it does in the end. The costume design is all really cool too. It's just iconic. Is it my thing? I can't really say it is, but it's cool. Night of the Living Dead, if anything, really made me wish I had more time this month to explore Romero's filmography. Because this is my first Romero film, and I love what he's doing here. I love the way he does zombie horror, I love the suspense, I love the climax, and I love those goofy camera angles. I mean, seriously, some of these shots look like paintings. I would absolutely hang them up around my house. It's a gorgeous movie visually with an ending that is genuinely kind of terrifying. I can't deny that a good portion of this, where it really feels like waiting around, does feel kinda empty. Like, sometimes it's suspenseful as hell, other times it's doing close to nothing for me. But for how much this is doing when it is doing something, I really like this. This is the last time I'll say this, but I also talked about this one in my found footage video, and I will try not to repeat myself here. Unfriended is far from a great movie, whatever that means to you, but it is interesting as hell to me. I respect this movie a lot, and I think it executed this concept really well. It's so simple where you really don't know how these characters are going to be inevitably murdered, but it's such a new type of mystery that it feels fun and exciting. Like I said in that video, this is a new modern take on the slasher flick, and I think it works really well. Reanimator is, it's good. It's just exactly what I expected, which isn't bad. It's not ridiculously amazing. It's just exactly what I was expecting. It's a little cheesy. It has cool effects. It's green, you know what I'm saying? It's just that kind of movie, and I was consistently entertained and definitely had a good time, but I was never blown away by anything that was shown. It was good, it was fun, that's everything I have to say about it. Now, Audition is pretty interesting. I know you could technically argue that every movie works where the first 90% acts as support for the last 10%. That's technically what every movie is, but this one specifically is like, it all comes together in that last brutal 10%. I've only seen one other Takashi Miike film, that film being First Love, which is just as violent but way more energetic than this. Not to say this is a drag to get through, it just moves a lot slower in a really compelling way. I definitely need to see this more than once because I feel like I'll pick up on a lot of things that happened earlier in the movie upon a second viewing, but for now I'll say this is a very original and very wild time. That last 10 minutes made me very nauseous. The Devil's Backbone is a Guillermo del Toro film from 2001 that is nothing like I expected. It's about a boy who goes to an orphanage and discovers a lot of weird things happening within it, and it's great. Guillermo is such a master at crafting a great protagonist and a horrible antagonist. Like, I always feel very strongly about both sides in his movies. He has a clear distaste for just terrible people, and it shows in the way he writes these films. Not to say anyone really likes a terrible person, it's just he knows how to write those people. The screenplay for this is unbelievably great. It really does prove he's one of the most poetic filmmakers doing it today. He's able to blend the abstract with a structured narrative so seamlessly. For as brutal as this film gets at times, it's very beautiful. I've recently realized I'm a big fan of John Carpenter because his movies all have a very distinct rhythm and atmosphere to them, but they're also so different from one another. He's easily one of the greatest filmmakers of all time just because of how much he's able to do well. In the Mouth of Madness is a fantastic example of this because while this definitely feels like a Carpenter film, it's extremely trippy and psychological and subconsciously horrifying. Every time I've had to talk about this, I dread it because I don't know how to talk about this. There's so much to say that I don't know how to put into words. It's just a really great concept that felt very ahead of its time, especially for how it was executed. The Orphanage is a very unsettling movie about a woman who takes her family to her childhood home and a lot of really creepy things happen. It's hard to talk about this one as well without spoiling it, so I don't want to say too much, but I was totally on edge the entire time. The supernatural themes and styles are always working really well, and the ending, it's good, check it out. Dead of Night is a horror anthology film where a group of people basically tell a bunch of very odd supernatural stories that happen to them, and it's a great time. I caught this one at a drive-in theater. It was my first experience with that, and I had a blast. Some of the stories in this are scary, others are hilarious, and others are just interesting. They each have their own flavor, but they all so perfectly fit under this same unnerving tone. The ventriloquist section is without a doubt one of my favorite things I've seen in a horror movie. It's just perfect. Death Dream, which also goes by Dead of Night sometimes apparently, is a movie about a soldier who is supposed to be dead who shows up to his family's home and things get spooky. I really like this mostly because it's so 70s, not only in its themes, but how it tells those themes, the camera movements, the performances, the set design. I'm into it. The ending I wouldn't say is disturbing, it just feels sad. It manages to be both terrifying and depressing in how it uses grief to do horror. It uses grief in a way that feels honest and not like a tool whose only purpose is to elevate emotion, which is nice because I feel like every horror movie uses grief in that way. Trick or Treat is so sharp and tight and good. I mean, this thing is just a little over an hour and I wouldn't have it any other way. It manages to accomplish so much in the runtime and does not overstay its welcome at all, which is such a good trait to have as a movie. I don't want to say every movie should be less than 90 minutes, but I mean, I wouldn't be upset about it. It makes all these twists and turns that you aren't expecting but are so satisfying when they happen. It's both suspenseful and funny, and it really puts you in the Halloween spirit. Slumber Party Massacre is one of the most entertaining and off-the-wall horror movies you'll find. It really, just doesn't shy away from showing the killer's face, which is super interesting to me. Usually the killer is really messed up in the face or has a mask on or is super mysterious, but this is just a guy, and I think that's more terrifying. I think all of the kills in this are super creative and fun. It's very self-aware throughout. It is just so unapologetic with its filmmaking, and I love that. Apparently the sequel is a musical. I gotta watch that apparently. I don't know, I'm a fan of this. It's stupid, but it's really fun. Inferno is the second Argento film I've seen, the first being Suspiria, and I feel like I'm completely on my own when I say I liked this more than Suspiria. I love his style as a filmmaker, the bright, colorful lights, the funky set design, the interesting scores. I think it's such a distinct atmosphere, and this doesn't let plot get in the way of that. Sure, it's a little all over the place, but it really feels like one cool kill after another, and they all use the setting to its fullest potential. I just had such a blast with this. Maybe I need to rewatch Suspiria to maybe give it a second chance or something, but this is absolutely my thing. Tales from the Hood is another horror anthology. This one tells 4 stories, all of which have something to do or say about racism and injustice in America. If it sounds heavy, it is. Some of these are very bold and truly horrific just because of what they're about. It is very obviously produced by Spike Lee in that it just goes for it and does not hold back at all with what it wants to say. It's insanely unapologetic, but although it is all of those things, it's also really good at knowing when to have some fun. The setups and deaths in this movie are so creative and at times, like I said, scary. There are a few jokes in here that actually land really well. I definitely recommend checking this one out, and I wish it was talked about a bit more than it is. Shiva Baby is the only film on this list where, at the time of recording this, I don't think a lot of you have seen it yet because it's only doing festival runs, but keep your eye out for it because this is one of the funniest, most anxiety-inducing, and original movies of the year. It's about a young bisexual Jewish woman who attends a Shiva where her family, ex-girlfriend, her sugar daddy, and his wife are all in attendance. It doesn't feel like a horror movie, but this is absolutely a horror movie. I cringed way more times than I can count, but it was also pretty hilarious. It also just nailed what it means and feels like to be bisexual in a family setting, which makes me happy because you don't see that enough. Please be on the lookout for this one because it's one of the best of the year. I watched Scream for the first time last month, and hell yeah, I loved this. Usually I think movies that try to be meta are kinda cheesy and don't work that much for me, but because this felt so self-aware and smart with how it went about commentating on horror, I really enjoyed it. All the characters were so fun to watch. Matthew Lillard is unhinged as fuck. This fully deserves its spot as one of the most iconic horror movies of all time because everything about this is fun, clever, and I'll say it, spooky. I kicked off the month with Firewalk with Me, and I can safely say that was the best way to start. Because Firewalk with Me is such an unsettling and paralyzing film that encapsulates everything I love about David Lynch and Twin Peaks. It is very hard to talk about this one without spoiling it, but I will say Laura Palmer is one of the greatest protagonists ever. I feel very emotionally attached to her still, and every time I think about her, I get sad. I don't feel that way because of the original series or because of The Return. I feel that way because of how human she feels in this movie and how horrific Lynch tells her story. Overall, it's beautiful, haunting, and a total fucking nightmare. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was my only rewatch this month because it's just too good. This is one of my favorite horror movies of all time simply because of how bold it is. The imagery and sound design is screaming at me every second of this. Even if it drags on certain moments, I never feel bored, I just grow more on edge. The characters are also so funny and ridiculous, they're simultaneously creepy and don't take themselves that seriously, specifically Leatherface. It builds into an ending that feels like the biggest exhale I've ever had in a horror movie, and an image that is completely unforgettable. The Evil Dead 2 makes me want to convince myself that the first one just never existed. This is a different universe entirely. This is, I'm serious, the craziest movie I think I've ever seen. It makes me want to jump out of a window. Right when you think it's at its peak, it tops itself. It just keeps going and it just keeps getting crazier, and I cannot emphasize how truly fun this is. I love and respect this film a lot just because it goes for it and commits. I think it is so incredibly rare to get a movie that does not care at all about whether or not something is quote-unquote too much. I wasn't, say, emotionally attached to any of it, how could I be, but I think the story of this film works. The characters are amazing, Bruce Campbell delivers I think the best performance I've ever seen. The camera is doing some absurd things. The ending is completely off the rails, like you have no idea how this is going to end, and then it just hits you in the face. I think it would be violently fun to experience this in a packed theater. It would be dangerously fun. I do think this is the most fun I've had watching a movie, and for that I gotta have it this far up on the list. Hey, I wasn't expecting this either. If you haven't heard of Black Christmas, it's about a sorority who, on Christmas, receive a series of anonymous calls from a killer who begins to strike his victims throughout the night. Pretty typical horror synopsis, but an amazing movie. It is, I think, my favorite horror movie. Don't go into it thinking it's anything mind-blowing or wildly different or special. It's just a really solid horror flick. It is hilarious, it is terrifying, it is so captivating and clever. Everything it sets out to do, it nails. It works really well as both a Halloween movie and a Christmas movie. All of the sorority sisters, specifically Barb, are fantastic protagonists. They each have a distinct personality and approach to the situation. The killer is terrifying, that voice could not be more unsettling. The editing, specifically during a Christmas Carol scene, is flawless and full of quirk, but it never gets in the way of the suspense. Which, speaking of, the suspense throughout is just, oh my god. This is an amazing horror film that leaves no room for error whatsoever, and it invites you into a world with so much flavor and depth that I could honestly watch it for hours. It definitely deserves that classic title, as pretty much every scene in this is unforgettable, and all I gotta say is I cannot believe this is the same guy that directed A Christmas Story. And you know what? That's gonna do for my Spooktober recap. Check out all these films and form your own opinion, and this time I mean it, because I think all of these, regardless of my take, are definitely worth checking out. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys watched. I probably won't read it.
And before you head out, I want to thank today's sponsor, Raycon.
You know me, I'm very picky about audio, and let me just tell you that Raycon's everyday E25 wireless earbuds check off all of my little boxes. For one, they're extremely comfortable, which in my opinion is super important when I'm on long car rides or doing a workout. Not only do they stay in my ear, but they sound good and they feel good. The bass on these puppies is flippin' sick. Like, you guys know me, I listen to a lot of really bassy music. Experiencing that kind of music with these headphones is a whole nother experience, in a good way. Not to mention they have 6 hours of playtime, which is super important when I'm editing a podcast. Basically, I've never really had any issues with these because of how much battery life they have. And they pair seamlessly with all my Bluetooth devices. If you can't already tell, they make it very easy for you to do what you need to do. To top it all off, they have all these different color options to fit whatever your style is, and tons of sizing options to fit that sweet little ear of yours. And folks, get this, they come in at half the price of other premium wireless earbuds. Come on. Get your own pair at buyraycon.com/Karsten or click on the link in the description to get 15% off your order and get started today.